Hello again, it's Jess or JashiiCorrin, and welcome back for my video on Zentangle ideas. A couple of weeks ago in a comment on one of my videos, somebody suggested that I do a video on different Zentangle patterns. Although I did try and find the original comment, I haven't been successful. So if that was your idea, thank you so much, and please do let me know it was you in the comments below. As you can see here, I've just ruled up a page of boxes that are 4 squares by 4 squares, so 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. And I'm going to be using these to house each of my different Zentangle patterns. For a lot of these, the pattern itself is going to be pretty self-explanatory, and I won't really need to go into a lot of detail. But for some others, I will give you guys a little bit more of an explanation of what I'm doing. Before we jump into it, just a reminder that any of the equipment I use in today's video will be linked in the description box below. Before we jump into the ideas section of this video, I figured I'd just show you a couple of places in my journals that I've used them. So the first place that I actually used Zentangles was in this doodle inspiration page, where I just drew out a few of the different types of Zentangles that you can do. This was when I was first introduced to Zentangles, and that was from a Skillshare video. Prior to actually finding out what Zentangles were, however, I set up this cover page for January 2017, which uses one of the patterns that I'll be showing you how to do today. This one would have to be my favourite pattern for sure, and it is relatively straightforward to do once you get the hang of it. Back in June of last year, Zentangles were actually the theme for my doodle challenge. So you can see I did a different Zentangle kind of pattern for every day of the month. Since then, Zentangles have been one of my go-to things to draw when I don't want to put a lot of effort in. As you may remember, in July of last year, I did this weekly spread that had these segments of Zentangle patterns as part of a header. I really liked how this one turned out, and I just had the word July over the top and a box for the numbers for the days of the week. So as you saw, I love using Zentangles to decorate my pages. What I'm now going to do is take you through 54 different Zentangle patterns that are relatively straightforward, and hopefully give you guys some ideas of ones you could use. For this, I'm going to be using my S-size Pitt Artist pen by Faber-Castell. As you'll already be aware, this is my favourite pen to do any black inking. So the most basic pattern to start with is just straight lines. And although that doesn't really sound like a pattern, it can be really visually effective depending on how you use it. You can see that for this one, I kept the lines relatively close together, and with a relatively even gap between each of them. A regular straight line pattern can be made different by putting different amounts of space between the lines, or possibly colouring in the gaps between the lines. You can see that for this one I alternated the gap as being a larger gap and then a smaller gap between each of the lines, and then at the end I went and coloured in that smaller gap just in another black pen. To decorate this Zentangle further, you could also go and fill in those gaps with something else as well. Another type of straight line pattern I like is where you actually break the lines as you draw them. That probably sounds a little bit strange, so I'll show you what I mean. You can see that for the line I've drawn here, I've left a small gap in the middle of the box. By changing where those gaps are as you work your way across, it kind of ends up looking like a wooden style pattern. Sometimes what I also like to do, just to add a little bit more visual interest, is that instead of just drawing one line, stopping and then drawing the next line, I'll draw the first line and then put a dot in that gap and then draw the second line. Although it's just a small addition, it does technically change the pattern. Of course, for this one I just went and put those gaps wherever I really wanted, but you could use this kind of a style to play around with negative space. You can see that by stopping the lines here, it kind of looks like there's a white object hovering over the lines. What some people will also do to make a pattern from this is connect each of the lines that are across from each other using a slight curved line. For this one you do need to make sure that you have the same number of lines going across though. As I do, I'll show you what I mean. By doing this, it kind of looks like there's an object hiding under a striped blanket or something like that. And depending on the shape that you're using, this can be really visually effective. So far I've just been really playing with the vertical lines, but of course you can always do these ones horizontally as well. These lines could also be done on a diagonal, or instead of being parallel to each other, intersecting or coming from one point. Again, filling this one in with different colours or patterns can make this pattern really unique. Moving away from just straight lines, you can also do spirals. I'm not very good at doing circular spirals, but more angular spirals is something I do quite like. To do this spiral, what you do is just start at a point near a corner, say here, and you go down to just out from the corner here. Once you reach that spot, you then do the same but going across and then going up. In the interest of making this one a spiral, when you move across to this dot again, you're going to make sure that you don't go all the way to that first starting point, but leave a little bit of room in between it. And then you repeat that process. So coming down just out from the corner, going across just out from the corner, going back up just out from the corner, and then back to the left, not going all the way to the line. When doing this type of pattern, the straighter you can keep your line, the more visually effective it will look. Of course, I'm just making this page to give you guys some inspiration for patterns you could use, so I'm not taking quite as much time as I usually would if I was actually putting this into one of my spreads. Along with this angular spiral, you can also do another one that's similar but slightly different. So starting in the same spot, you go down to the same place we did before, and then just over slightly. Then you go back up to just across from your original starting spot. And then again, you go just over. What we're essentially making here is something that kind of looks like that old school snake game. Again, the straighter that you can make your lines with this one, and the more even that you can keep the gap between each of your lines, the more visually effective this one will look. Instead of just doing this one vertically or horizontal, you can also do it on a diagonal. Of course, if you wanted, you could connect these lines to the edges of the box and then colour in one side or the other, which would also be quite interesting. Another simple but effective pattern is the checkerboard. The way you do this one is just by drawing horizontal and vertical lines that are an even space apart, and then just colouring in each alternating box. You could colour those boxes in fully or use some kind of pattern, and I'm going to show you a few different ones you might want to use. So we have one where you just colour it in like a regular checkerboard, and then for this next one it's all about more line work. So I'm going to start by drawing a diagonal line across this box, and then missing a box I'm going to go to the next one and draw another diagonal line, and then the same on this side as well, so missing a box and then drawing a diagonal line. In all of the boxes that I've missed here, I'm also going to draw a diagonal line but the other way. Now as I have a lot more segments, this opens up a lot more opportunities. I can either go and colour in some of those segments, add more patterns, or leave them blank. And I'm going to do a little bit more line work for these ones. So for each of the boxes, I'm going to add 2 additional diagonal lines that match the same direction as those boxes, just one on either side. So for this one that goes down to the right, I'm going to add 2 more diagonal lines that also go down to the right. And I'm going to do the same for every box that has that style of diagonal line. For my boxes that have diagonal lines the other way, I'm going to do the same thing but in reverse. The trick here is making sure that the diagonal line I draw there matches up with the diagonal lines I just added in. So this one here should match up with these two. And these two. And I'm going to do the same thing for each of them. So this is a style of pattern you've probably seen some people fill in their habit tracker with. It is quite popular. For the next one, I'm going to do something similar, but slightly different. So first of all, going in with those diagonal lines. And remember, missing a box and then going to the next one. Missing a box and going to the next one. And then going back the other way. So this one's another popular style that people use for habit trackers. And what we're going to do is that along each of the diagonal lines, we're going to add two curved lines, one on either side. And these curved lines come out of the same points and go into the same points as the diagonal lines that are already there. I'll show you what I mean. So if we take this one for instance, I'm going to draw a curved line on either side, and the curved line is going to come out of this point and go into that point. So it kind of looks like a leaf. And I'm going to do that for each of the diagonal lines that I have in this one. In theory, if you've done this one correctly, it should kind of look like you have circles overlaying your boxes. So a circle here, a circle there, a circle there. Going with another checkerboard pattern. For this one, I'm going to again cut these with diagonal lines, but then I'm going to do something a bit different. In this one, you can see that each of the boxes was cut with a diagonal line that goes in the same direction. What I'm now going to do is fill in either side of each of the boxes with a different pattern. So each box will be the same, but each of the triangles within those boxes will be different. For the lower side of each of these triangles, that one's filled in just by drawing 3 ovals that go big, medium, small. In the top half, I'm just going to be using some horizontal lines. As per usual, the more careful and precise you are with the line work, the more visually effective this ends up. But you can see that using that same checkerboard style, we can get quite a few different pattern ideas. Of course, your checkerboard doesn't just have to be straight horizontal and vertical lines. It can be slightly different. So for this one, I made, instead of horizontal lines, a zigzag pattern just by connecting the dots in my LT 1917. And of course, these ones can be filled in with those different styles of patterns we've talked about, or just by using block coloring. The original checkerboard effect also can be done using horizontal and vertical lines in a different way. So what I've done here is fill up one box of my LT just with vertical lines, and the ones next to it, either from the bottom or the side, are going to be done with horizontal lines. And then we're just going to alternate vertical and horizontal lines as we move our way down. As I said before, the more time you take, the better it looks. But hopefully this gives you an idea about what I mean. Patterns that involve these kind of layover of the horizontal and vertical lines are one of my favorites, and I'm going to show you a few more of those now. So for this one, we're going to start by drawing a vertical line up the side. And then along the top, coming out of that, we're going to draw a horizontal one. So it doesn't go all the way to the edge, but just to where that line was. And then from there, we're going to draw another vertical line going down, but remember, just touching that line we drew. Similar idea again, we're going to go across to the left, just touching that line we drew. For this one, you also want to make sure it stops at the first line you drew. We're going to repeat this over and over until we get to the center. So for this one, it kind of ends up looking like planks of wood that have been laid one over the top of the other. While this one went all the way around the square, we're going to do a similar thing, but just using 2 edges in this one. So starting again with that vertical line, and then doing a horizontal line. Instead of going up this side now, we're going to go back up this side. And then we're going to go along the bottom again. And then you just repeat this idea until you get to the corner. I quite like this one because it again looks like you've got those planks that are laying one over the other. If you wanted this kind of zigzag thing in the middle to be a little bit thicker, you could either make those lines less close together or further apart, or you could put multiple in rather than just one. So here I've drawn 3 vertical lines, and I'm now going to draw 3 horizontal lines, and then 3 vertical lines. So similar idea, you just end up with that zigzag being a bit thicker. For this next one, we're going to do a similar thing, but also incorporate diagonal lines. So I'm going to start with the diagonal lines in this corner here. 1, 2, and 3. And then coming from this, I'm also going to draw some vertical lines. And then again, I'm going to go in with the horizontal lines. And I'm going to repeat this idea until I get to the corner. So diagonal, then vertical, then horizontal. So you can see all of these patterns follow this similar idea of having those overlapping sections, but the patterns themselves are distinctly different. Other types of patterns you can use are what I'm going to be calling strip style patterns. So patterns that use kind of bars that have patterns inside them. That probably didn't make a lot of sense, so I'm going to show you what I mean. So for each of these patterns, I'm going to start by drawing horizontal lines to break each of these boxes into 4 sections. Ideally, if you were to do this one, those lines would be a little bit straighter. What we're now going to do is use these to make some different patterns. And the first one we're going to do, we actually need that kind of checkerboard style thing again. So I'm going to draw some vertical lines. For this one, what we're now going to do is draw in some diagonal lines in a zigzag pattern. So we end up with a similar thing to what we had up here, but the way we fill this in now is going to be a little bit different. So starting on this section here in the middle, where these lines are intersecting, we're going to draw 2 lines that come out of this point, going downwards in each of these boxes. We're then going to do a similar thing to this, but on this point. And instead of those lines going downwards, we're going to have them going upwards. So coming out of this point and going up here and up there. And we're going to do the same thing as we did here on that side as well. Repeating this idea, for these ones up here, we're going to draw 2 lines that come downwards and meet the lines we just drew in. So we end up with these kind of diamond shapes. For the middle point, we're going to draw 2 lines coming up out of that. And you want to repeat this pattern for the rest of the box. If done properly, you end up with this interesting diamond kind of pattern, which is a little bit trickier, but looks pretty cool. For this one, we're going to keep it super simple and just draw in some zigzagging triangles. And as I talked about previously, those triangles can be filled in any way you want. I'm going to colour them in an alternating black and white pattern. What ends up happening with this one is that any triangles that are pointing upwards or in one direction will have the same pattern or colour, and the ones that are pointing in the opposite direction will have the other pattern or colour. Of course, for these styles of patterns, you don't just have to use straight lines. I personally find curved lines a lot harder to do, but they can look really, really pretty. Another type of pattern, which is my favourite, is by doing what I'm going to call spiral triangles. I'm not sure what they're actually called, but they're essentially triangles that have a spiral inside them. These can also be done with squares, however, so I'm going to show you that one first, because I can just use the boxes that I've drawn out. So starting in the corner of one box, you want to draw a line towards another corner, but not at that corner. And the corner should be adjacent, it shouldn't be opposite. So I'm going to go from this corner up to this one, but slightly out from it. So I end up with a really thin triangle shape. So you can see I have that thin kind of triangle shape here. I'm now going to go to the next adjacent one, again going slightly out from the corner. And then to the next one, out from the corner. Once you get to here, you want to go back towards the corner you started, again slightly out from it, and draw this one to connect to the line that you drew to start with. So you can see the spiral's starting to take shape. This one's quite similar to the one we had up here, but instead of drawing horizontal and vertical lines, we end up with slightly diagonal lines. So you can see we end up with this kind of triangular shaped spiral pattern. I think it looks really cool. The way I typically like to do this one, however, is first by separating my section I'm using into odd shaped triangles, and then doing that pattern inside of them. So you can see I've just broken this section up into some different shaped triangles, and now for each of those I'm going to go and do that spiral pattern inside of them. So remember, starting at one corner and going just out from the edge of the next one, just out from the edge of the next one, just out from the edge of the next one. What I like to do for this one is make sure that the spirals that I'm putting inside each triangle go in the same direction. So if you start off going clockwise, continue clockwise. If you start off going anti-clockwise, continue anti-clockwise. You don't have to do this, but I find it does end up looking a little better if you keep them consistent. So for mine, I've been doing it clockwise, going around in that direction. So I'm going to keep doing that for each of these triangles. For this one, the straighter that you can make your lines and the tighter that you can make your spiral while still being able to distinguish those lines, the better your image looks at the end. This one, for sure my favorite. Another type of pattern that's really popular is the basket weaving pattern. And the easiest way I find to draw this one is start by, over the little dots on your page, draw a little black square. These are going to be those little gaps in between each of your weaving panels. To actually put the weaving pattern in, what we now want to go and do is add some horizontal and vertical lines. And the positions for this are kind of hard to explain, so I'm just going to show you. You can see that I haven't drawn these ones coming out of the middle of those little squares, but rather from the sides of each of them. What's also important to remember is that you do technically have little dots along the edge of this box. So going and putting in some smaller black squares or half squares where those dots would be is important. Now as you've started this weave in the middle, it's relatively easy to continue on. So vertical lines, horizontal lines, vertical lines, and on the other side, horizontal lines. And then the similar but reverse for the next line. And then filling in the top and the bottom. The rest of the patterns I have for this one are fairly self-explanatory, so I'm not going to do a lot of explanation for those. Instead, I'm going to hand you over to the time-lapse and the background music. Alrighty, and that's where we're gonna leave it for today. As with a lot of the idea videos I give you, this is not an exhaustive list. There are plenty of other different Zentangle patterns, both easy and a little bit more challenging, that you could use if you wanted to do this in your journal. As I showed you guys, Zentangles are some of my favorite things to draw. And because a lot of them are so easy, it's a great place to start if you're new to doodling. Thank you for watching. If you had a favorite of one of these patterns, let me know in the comments below. I'll be back again on Thursday with another weekly Plan With Me video, so if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel to make sure that you don't miss it. As I mentioned at the start, this one was a video idea from you guys, so if you have any other ideas for videos you want to see, do let me know. Until next time, bye!